I'm Patricia, and this is Investigating Vegan Life with Patricia Kathleen. This series features interviews and conversations I conduct with experts from food and fashion to tech and agriculture, from medicine and science to health and humanitarian arenas. Our inquiry is an effort to examine the variety of industries and lifestyle tenets in the world of vegan life. To that end, we will cover topics that have revealed themselves as common and integral when exploring veganism. The dialogue captured here is part of our ongoing effort to host transparent and honest rhetoric for those of you who, like myself, find great value in hearing the expertise and opinions of individuals who have dedicated their work and lives to their ideals. You can find information about myself and my podcast at patriciakathleen.com. Welcome to Investigating Vegan Life. Now let's start the conversation. Hi everyone, and welcome back. Today I am absolutely honored to be sitting down with Ingrid Newkirk. Ingrid is the founder and president of PETA. You can find out all information that we speak about today, as well as contact the organization on PETA.org. Welcome, Ingrid.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. I am so elated to have you on. You're nothing short of a hero and a legend in my household and the communities I run in. And so I cannot wait to be able to ask you all of these questions over the next hour. I hope to make it as enjoyable for you as possible, and I know our audience will adore it.
I'm very grateful to everybody who does anything that's kind, anything that helps animals along the way, and thank you for doing it.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, I'm going to give you a quick trajectory of the inquiry basis for today's podcast. We will first look at unpacking Ingrid's recent book that she wrote in tandem with Jean Stone. It's called Animalkind: Remarkable Discoveries About Animals and Revolutionary New Ways to Show Them Compassion. I'll have Ingrid help me unpack that. I'll interpret a little bit of what I received from it as a reader and also ask her about what she intended to convey as an author. And then we will turn our efforts towards unpacking a few areas of inquiry that I had, namely different terms that seem to be hot pockets right now in today's society and certainly on social networking regarding greenwashing, humane washing. I'll also ask her a little bit about the EPA and the recent agreement to a roadmap to step away from using animal toxicity testing and what's happening on that front that PETA is directly responsible for, as well as the Research Modernization Act that was sponsored by New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, and where that is at. Again, on part of PETA, is that in play? And then we'll wrap everything up with questions regarding educating and helping the next generation that I have regarding children. For many of you, this podcast, I'm wildly interested in the education aspect for the next generation. And we'll wrap the entire podcast up with our famous rapid fire questions that we have collected from those of you that are listening, that subscribe to our newsletter, and everything that you have kind of voiced for Ingrid and PETA as well. Before peppering her with her book on Animalkind, a quick bio for those of you on Ingrid specifically. Ingrid Newkirk is the founder and president of People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world, with more than 6.5 million members and supporters worldwide. She's the author of more than a dozen books that have been translated into several languages, including her latest, Animalkind: Remarkable Discoveries About Animals and Revolutionary New Ways to Show Them Compassion. Newkirk, a former Washingtonian of the Year, has been featured for her work for animals in The New Yorker, Time Magazine, People Magazine, Forbes, The Financial Times, and numerous other publications. She has appeared on TV shows and podcasts all over the world, including on Real Time with Bill Maher, the Rich Roll podcast, and Here's the Thing with Alec Baldwin. She is the subject of a BBC special and the HBO documentary, I Am an Animal. So Ingrid, I cannot wait to kind of climb through everything. I first want to look at your book, which I just finished, and you and I were talking off the record. I had my 15-year-old daughter read last night, who was thoroughly engrossed and just is still kind of reeling from the discoveries in the book, particularly things where, a huge compassionately based, animal-based, humane-based family. And there's just so many new discoveries that someone who thinks that they're up to date on doesn't know about. And so I'm excited to unpack that for you. I want to quickly say a summary for me that I kind of journaled after finishing it for a second time was I considered it to be a current contemplation and exploration of the animal kingdom with latter day discoveries and insights made over the past decade, overturning what common knowledge regarding animals has been up until now, exceeding what animals are capable of. With records to the collie that remembers over 2,000 names for objects, down to the slime moles navigating a maze, to the exhibition of flirting and love and affection and parenting in species not normally examined when looking at animal welfare. So those were my main kind of takeaways from it that struck me as someone who's been very involved in animal rights for the past decade. I'm wondering, as an author, before we get into kind of the breakdown of the composition of the book, what was your intention for your reader as you were writing it?
Well, Patricia, PETA is 40 years old this year, and I think things have changed so much since when we started out. When at that time everybody wanted a fur coat, women wanted to show that they had arrived by wearing a mink, and Ringling Brothers was the biggest, they said the greatest, I'll say the biggest show on earth, with their elephants standing on their heads and parading through the streets. And if you wanted to know if you were pregnant, you had to send in a urine sample. It would be injected into a rabbit and the rabbit would die. So all sorts of things have happened in that 40 years. We have virtual reality, we have the internet, we have wonderful technology that can replace the patter of little feet in the laboratory. And we have fabulous materials to make our clothing out of. And of course, vegan food is everywhere. So I thought, what a wonderful time when people are more alert and respectful of animals and interested in them and are watching National Geographic specials and all sorts of things. I'll put together some things that people don't perhaps know about animals, jaw-dropping facts in some cases about their communication, their language, their emotions, all that sort of stuff. And then I think that should prepare people to go into the second part of the book, which is now that you know who animals are, what can we do to stop even inadvertently hurting them through our buying habits, our eating habits, through the clothes that are in our wardrobe, in all sorts of ways. So it was a great opportunity to put together some of the things I've been collecting in file drawers and on the internet about animal facts, and share them with a new audience. After 40 years of struggling to get animals on the map, they're on the map, and there's a lot that has to be done.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I don't know if it's my naivete or what it is, but I feel like over the past 10 years, the movement and the traction has, has gone faster than it was the 40 before it. There's been this, especially with vegan food and people kind of assigning, and we'll get to COVID in a moment. There's a lot of rapid fire questions regarding that, but there was a conversation, people were having an analysis and a return to a dialogue in regards to sustainability, accountability, animal welfare, and those types of things. What I really do love about it, the second section of the book, the first was, I was enthralled. I love folklore. I love story. I love humanity and drawing that link that isn't so very disparate between animals and humans and how we're all alike. But the second part, the action items, I think are so crucial and so key to really help people realize that there's 50,000 choices a day that they make that can make the difference. And so the section 2 has the revolutionary new ways to show them compassion. That's the title. It's scientific research, clothing, entertainment, and food. And you really draw out, specific ways and the industries that are affecting this most. I'm wondering if you can kind of elaborate a little bit on scientific research. I know that is like one of the strongholds that kind of parlays us into what's happening in Washington with the EPA and the Research Modernization Act and things like that. But can you kind of explain to everyone right now what is happening with the scientific research in regards to humane treatment with animals?
Sure. PETA has 18 scientists in different disciplines who are on the full-time staff. And we have two other departments that are devoted solely to getting animals out of the labs, out of the suffering, which is enormous. The fear alone that they experience is almost unimaginable, and to replace them with other ways of doing research. Now, a lot of people still think the old-fashioned idea is, oh, they must just use a few animals and they must treat them well and they must use them only for really, really important life-saving things. And nothing could be further from the truth. We've got psychologists who have not 1 hour of medical training who are cutting into animals or scaring the living daylights out of them, taking their infants away, putting them in boxes just to see if they'll develop properly, and of course they won't. I mean, we have such ridiculous, insupportable, unimaginable things happening. So we delve into that. We find the most ridiculous, the most cruel, and we attack them. But technology is now on our side. We've got whole human DNA on the internet. You know, you can get lungs on a chip. You can get human organs on a chip now. And we've got even people who are growing slices of the human brain in a petri dish and cultivating it. So you really do not have any excuse for using animals, even in things that you might think, well, that's how it's always been done. Need to move away from it. We have cloned human skin. We don't need to burn pigs with a blowtorch anymore. I know, and that pregnancy test I mentioned, you know, you buy something at the drugstore over the counter, you take it home, you see within a matter of minutes whether or not you're pregnant. You don't have to kill an animal to find that out. So with technology on our side, we are moving forward. There is the Research Modernization Act. All the pharmaceutical companies will try to defeat it. All the people who make cages, decapitators, animal feed for what they call lab chow, for all the various species being tormented in these cages, they'll all fight it. And these big drug companies and their trade groups, like Biomedical Foundation, they will put a lot of money into trying to elect people who will then be on their side. So it's not easy. But luckily we have youngsters coming up who are saying, I don't want to test on animals, this is rubbish. We have a movie that's coming out now. It'll be in the film festival soon. That's all about PhD candidates who were told, you won't get your PhD as a scientist unless you test on animals. And they were bullied into doing it. And they're now all saying, we so regret it. We realized it didn't help anyone. It just killed animals. And that's not how you learn in a modern society. So lots of things happening. The new COVID vaccine is skipping some animal tests along the way. That's a great breakthrough. That's knocking about 4 to 6 years off, seeing if we can get a vaccine. We've got the EPA saying they're going to move away from toxicity or poisoning tests on animals. They're moving to in vitro methods. So things are changing, but everybody needs to get behind it. You can find on PETA.org current campaigns where people are doing absolutely atrocious things to animals, and we need your voice in the mix to say, this has to stop. I don't want my tax dollars spent to hurt and kill animals.
Yeah, absolutely. And PETA.org, I will say, I'll get into it a little bit later as we talk about children and education, but it does a phenomenal job at collating mountains of information. I'm wondering, speaking of kind of curating huge amounts of information, when you went to write the book, how did you decide which examples and species you were going to cite? It sounds like such an arduous process after you've collected all of the data. How did you curate the book?
Oh, it was great fun. I mean, it could have been the length of an encyclopedia because there's so much that just makes you in awe of animals. But I had certain rules. You mentioned slime molds, and I put them in for a bit of fun because slime molds can actually find their way through a maze. And there's been a lot of talk about the intelligence of slime molds. But I put from the smallest animal, a snail, for example, who will build a door out of their mucus when they feel that when they sense that a storm is coming. They'll build a double door and hide behind it until the storm has passed to the elephant. And of course, elephants, everybody loves them. And it's amazing how they communicate subsonically under the ground. They send these signals a mile or two to other elephants. And the elephants don't just hear a rumble sound. They know what it means. It means we found water in a drought area, or it means be careful, someone is rounding up the children. And I've put in things about their trunks, how they use them as snorkels, how they can pick up a paper clip with them. I put in familiar animals like dogs, because, you know, their noses are so incredible. They are now being used to not only detect epilepsy and breast cancer, but all sorts of other diseases, including COVID-19. They're being trained to detect that. But also unfamiliar animals like reindeer, who have the natural equivalent of sunglasses. Their eyes are blue in winter, but they turn yellow in summer, and they see an ultraviolet light. And they produce their own vitamin C because the sun isn't out where they live so much. So I did a real mix match, and I really put in things that I found interesting, like dolphin whistles, giving their children a whistle name from the day they're born, and knowing them for the rest of their lives. Every dolphin has their own special whistle name. Anything that I thought, I can't resist this one.
Yeah. Well, and it made my list too. I can't imagine leaving anything out. And what you did choose, I found it like an enchantingly peculiar combination, you know, just random ones. The Nature Channel is constantly running in my house when the TV is permitted. And the amount of animal you covered that was both familiar but unfamiliar, the reindeer, for example, I'd never questioned, you know, the reindeer and its dear ancestors. I was very dazzled by the examples, and then also the current and up-to-date applications for, you know, revolutionizing change and really affecting economy. And to that end, when you were on Bill Maher, you had a wonderful interview with him over the past year, and you said something that really struck me in conversation with the book in particular, because I feel like that sentiment that Bill quoted you on was echoed throughout your entire second half of your book. And I might butcher it a bit because I pulled it from memory, but Bill said that he always remembered you saying that social movements go from ridicule to discussion to change, or something to that effect. And part two of your book echoes that so loudly, you know, that it's about opening the discussion and going through ridicule and getting to change. And I love that that concept. Do you believe that when you started PETA, you had that kind of in your mind, because you did go through ridicule, decades of it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, every social movement does. You can look back in history, whether it's human rights, women's rights, you know, the rights for the disabled. Everybody, when they are forced to put forward a new idea about justice and against discrimination and so on, gets vilified, mocked, the works. And I mean, back through history, there have been extraordinary stories that I take great comfort from, because those people prevailed, even though they were just made terrible fun of. Sojourner Truth is one of my heroes. She was a very slight, small black woman in a time when only white men had anything to say or were welcome anywhere, when only white men had voting rights and property ownership rights and so on. And she would march right in, set up a soapbox, and start to talk about how unjust this was. She had the boarding house where she was staying burned down. They threw things at her. She was chased out of town, but she kept going. And of course, today, we know that she was right. So a lot of things change if you just keep going. And I say to people, what have you got to be afraid of? If you know you're right and you are fighting against an injustice, don't go to your grave thinking, well, I had a voice, but I didn't use it. I had typing fingers, I didn't use them. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't speak up or say anything, do anything. We are so privileged that we have the opportunity to change things in this world and to push kindness at every opportunity and to work to stop bias and discrimination. So yes, who cares if somebody laughs? they'll be laughing on the other side of their face in the end. Well, because things will change if you keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. I concur. And I think that using one's voice in any way comfortable or to fit oneself is, it's a talent of creativity to kind of assign which way you can best use your voice. I'm wondering, when you talk about speciesism, this is a term that I mentioned to a lot of activists that gets a lot of confusion. People have a different way of defining it across the board. And I saw an interview with you on YouTube. I don't recall the source, but you were actually wearing a shirt by PETA with the word on it. I'm wondering if you can help define that for the community, how you yourself define speciesism.
Well, it's catching on, and the shirt has become quite popular. It's an end speciesism shirt. Yes, absolutely. It's very easy to understand, actually. I always say, if you're against violence, if you're against discrimination, if you're against injustice, if you believe in respect, then it doesn't really matter who the victim of these bad things is, and it doesn't really matter who should be respected. It just matters that they should be respected. My mother used to say, it doesn't matter who suffers, but that they suffer, and what can you do about it? And so who cares if it's a man or it's a woman or it's someone from China or it's a Muslim or it doesn't matter. So speciesism is like sexism, racism, ableism, and so on, is that the victim's identity shouldn't matter to you. We have enough of a heart to open our heart to all. And if we find ourselves saying, oh, well, they're just what? They're just animals? Well, so are you. If you took Biology 101, you're an animal too. You mentioned that the HBO people did a documentary about me called I Am an Animal. I am proudly an animal. I don't like nationalism. I don't like speciesism. I am just a living being. And if living beings share the ability to feel pain and joy and love and grief and all these things, if you burn me with a cigarette and you burn a cow with a cigarette and you burn a child with a cigarette, we're all going to be in pain. So if you cannot inflict that pain on any of us, thank you. We're all in this together. So any of these discriminating barriers that we put up, if we understand discrimination, we should understand it across the board and not discriminate ourselves by deciding, well, I understand that, but I'm not going there. There is a step too far. It isn't. The slippery slope is a fabulous thing. Go down it.
Yeah. In speaking with terms as well, just to clarify a few, there's greenwashing is a really hyper used term right now on social media. And I did just a brief Urban Dictionary kind of definition, colloquialism, and it came up as conveying the false impression that something is environmentally friendly. And you talk in a lot of your interviews about humane washing. And so to that end, I was wondering if you would agree that a definition to humane washing was conveying the false impression and or misleading claims about the treatment of animals or the condition in which they are born, raised, or are killed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you a classic example. You go to the grocery store and some kind person has painstakingly bought some eggs in a carton that shows green, lush fields, maybe a child holding a pet chicken. It just looks lovely. And you think that person is obviously thinking, well, I'm doing a good thing. I'm buying humane eggs. And it may say on the package, farm raised, free range, organic, all these things doesn't mean a thing. Absolutely not a thing. Most of that is total humane washing. We've been inside, for example, Nellie's Eggs is a big one on the East Coast. They advertise on National Public Radio. People think that they're doing something special by buying them. We've been in a Nellie's Eggs shed, and the birds are just crammed. Yes, they're not in cages. They are crammed. They don't even have 1 square foot of space. They can't live by their pecking order because they're just so aggressed by the other birds. They pretend that they go outside. Well, if it's not winter, if it's not raining, if there's no storm, if it's a sunny day, between certain hours, if they can fight their way to the few small holes in the side of that factory farm shed, they can go out into a dirt patch that's very small. So people are horrified. We've showed them the videos as they exit the store with their humane eggs and said, do you realize you're being taken for a ride? They know you're a kind consumer, and so they have humane washed their egg sales. And so we always say to people, you don't need to take anything, steal anything from an animal, and no animal needs to be killed in order for you to eat or dress or buy something. It's 2020. You know, we've got everything at our fingertips, a world of choices, and there's something that you want that comes from a non-animal source, whatever it is. So get an egg replacer. Don't be suckered by these companies that are trying to fool you into thinking the animals were happy. The animals were miserable and they were slaughtered, even for eggs, even for milk.
Yeah, for wool, for any of it.
For wool, yep, the whole shebang. If it comes from an animal, you ask yourself one question. Do you think they were volunteers? Do you think they gave this up willingly? Or do you think that it was stripped from them? It's their coat. It's their life. It's their flesh. Leave it be.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. I think it's so powerful. I'm wondering if you can kind of unpack. I've had conversations with people. There's been a little bit of confusion, at least among colleagues of mine that we've spoken with on the podcast, regarding the EPA and the roadmap to step away that they've agreed to from using animals in toxicity testing. So I was hoping you could kind of explain briefly what toxicity testing is and what this agreement is kind of pointing towards and what the reality of it might mean.
Sure. Our scientists have worked with the Environmental Protection Agency for years. We've also protested them for years. And we've had wonderful consumer involvement in trying to push them in the right direction. And now they're going in the right direction, albeit slowly. And hopefully we can speed them up. And that's what we'll be trying to do. What they have decided, and we were sitting beside them when they made the announcement, so I think it shows that there is a relationship here between the humane community and the government finally, is that by 2035, which is a long way away, they will have stopped all toxicity tests on animals. Now, that means that for the first time ever in history, they do have a roadmap, they have a plan, and they plan to get rid of animal tests. The toxicity tests that are used on animals are just appalling. They're very crude. They were developed in about the 1920s, and they've been used ever since, if that tells you anything, despite all the progress we've made in science. And they consist of taking a poisonous or toxic substance, or one that's suspected to be poisonous or toxic, and putting it down the animal's throat, either by gavage with a tube or just making them eat it in food, forcing it down them perhaps, putting it in their eyes, and you all know about the Dray's test, you know, where they used to, and don't so much anymore, but used to put every cosmetic in a rabbit's eyes and see what happened, including ones that will eat away the eye. They smear this on their skin. That's the other thing. They ingest it, put it down their throat, on their skin, in their eye. And this is what they do. They see how it reacts in an animal, which may or may not have any bearing on how it reacts in a human being. The thing is, you don't need any of that. A lot of these tests have been conducted for years and years. There are lists of the reactions of animals. They vary the amounts of poison, see what this amount does, whether it's 50% morbidity, mortality, or what it is. So there are new things you can use. We have developed an artificial lung, for example, that can replace rats and mice and guinea pigs who are stuffed into tubes and have to inhale nicotine and cigarette smoke for hours and hours every day. You can use the artificial lung now. We've developed antibodies that come from non-animal sources, are grown in vitro, instead of from rabbits who suffer terribly to make antibodies. So all these things have to go and have to be replaced with state-of-the-art modern research methods. And that process has now begun at the EPA.
Are you under the impression or suspicion that it could be hastened faster than the date of 2035 if inclined,
Oh,
incentivized?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that was a long-term goal. And there's no reason that it can't be just pushed along much, much faster. And exponentially, things are happening. You know, there's some new technology comes out, and suddenly we find we can do things. Look at 3D printing. Whoever thought of that, even 5 years ago? So, you know, yes, it will be much faster. I have every reason to believe.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's work towards that. I'm wondering the Research Modernization Act, if we can kind of clear that up too. And for anyone who's into logistics out there or in Washington, eking for it, it's the 3773 115th. And I'm wondering if the status on it's called the Primate Protection and Research Modernization Act of 2018. It's sponsored by New Jersey Senator and former presidential running candidate for the Democratic Party, Cory Booker. And can you give everyone listening kind of an update as to where that's at or what it was to begin with?
Well, you know how hard it is to pass federal legislation. I mean, bureaucrats and the government move about as slowly as you can imagine. Slime molds can run circles around them. So it may be that really isn't going to go anywhere. We don't know. It's very useful to get in touch with your representatives and push for it, and to show Cory Booker and others support for it. Again, it's a start. It's a wonderful thing. Nothing like this has ever been introduced before, which shows progress just in mindset, if in nothing else. Every time there's a session, it's not going to pass, it's going to have to be reintroduced. But meanwhile, I mean, we need to push our representatives to challenge places like the National Institutes of Health that are spending billions of tax dollars using millions of animals and hundreds of thousands of monkeys, primates, fellow primates like ourselves, in all sorts of cockamamie experiments. I mentioned psychology experiments. There are so many more that are going on all over the place. There is a move, and this bill is part of it, to get primates, our closest living relatives, out of the laboratory. I mean, I think that's marvelous. We, of course, saw success with chimpanzees when finally the Congress and then the NIH decided chimpanzees are so like human beings, sharing all this, 98 point something percent of their DNA, sharing so much in common with them, we can't justify using them anymore. And we had kept them in small cells, concrete, alone, done all sorts of hideous AIDS and hepatitis experiments on them, and allowed them to die in pitiable conditions. Chimpanzees out. Now, what about the monkeys? Can they go too? And then on, I hate to say down the line, because I don't see it that way. I don't see the hierarchy of species. But can we keep going and get all the animals out, get empty cages, not bigger cages in the end? So this is a start, and everybody needs to talk to their representatives and show support for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I'm wondering, moving on to kind of this educational aspect before we start our rapid fire from our audience members. I'm very passionate about education and changing things with the next generation in the current as well. But education, I believe you've said as well in the past that I feel like it's one of the core constituents that will actually push some of the axiomatic truths regarding humane treatment and ethical treatment of animals forward in the future. And I'm wondering, I get a lot of questions as a current member of PETA, but also just as a compassionate vegan person regarding zoos with people, and there's been a lot of pushback. I think there's a lot of sometimes accurate but lay opinions that zoos do a lot of benefit, that they help educate. There's a great deal of scientific study. There's controlled breeding with animals that are almost extinct. And I was hoping to kind of get your opinion on this. Do you consider any zoo or animal reserve? I live in San Diego, California. You have everything from the horrific, SeaWorld to the world famous San Diego Zoo to there's a cheetah reserve up north. And they all kind of have this different stint on whether they care at all about the welfare of the animals that they keep. And I'm wondering, you personally, what is your opinion? Is there such thing as a humane zoo? And how do you answer people who say there's benefits to animals in zoos?
Well, I don't know exactly what the benefits are unless it's a refuge, unless it's a place that takes in displaced animals who haven't anywhere else to go and looks after them properly, with respect, with care, with as much attention to their habitat and their needs and their habits as they can. I think in my book, I've got a lot of information about how the zoo began. You know, these old menageries when people had not left their native lands and started to go to South America and started to go to Africa and these exotic places. And they saw animals they'd never seen before, the giraffe, rhino, you know, various birds, elephants. And they thought, got to get some of those and bring them back. And mortality rate was extremely high. Animals died in the holds of ships. They didn't know how to take care of them. They didn't know their diet. So there was terrible suffering. And they brought them back, stuck them in what were extremely small enclosures. Ringling Brothers had a zoo up in New York where animals died in a fire. Animals were kept on cement. Anyway, it was for people to gawk at. It was purely for human amusement and entertainment. Now, a lot of zoos have evolved and have much better living conditions for animals, but a lot of them breed animals and then swap them around so that they can have more entertaining animals, like baby animals, for people to see. They're trying to up their attendance. Other zoos, like the one in Detroit, is very, very good. They've decided, look, when our elephants go, elephants are gone. We cannot meet any of their needs. We must face the fact. This is not right. It's cruel to keep them. So it depends. But the big thing, I think, at the moment, the sort of soft side of this that has to be done away with is the roadside zoo. This is summer, and some people are traveling. And when more people are traveling, they're going to see those signs that say, come and see the baby bears. You know, there are bear pits in the south of this country. There are all sorts of roadside zoos. And most of those are just abominations. They'll have what is a herd animal or a flock animal, a social animal kept in isolation by themselves in a wire see-through box known as a cage or a kennel or pen. And that's their whole life. You walk in, look around, walk out, they're there day and night, and you know, just that's their life. Their life has been stolen from them. So eventually nobody will want real zoos any more than they will want to go to the real animal circus. There's virtual reality. You can get up close and personal without touching a hair on an animal's head with virtual reality. And these aquariums, these SeaWorld places, I mean, how can you take an animal who will swim for hundreds of miles and take them and put them in a cement pen, a cement pool, and have them chewing on the bars, trying to get out underwater, deprived of their sonar, deprived of the ocean, the waves, things to do and see and places to go. It's an abomination, absolute abomination.
It absolutely is, and I agree. I think that one of the books that you talked about as kind of an impetus for launching PETA was Peter Singer's book Animal Liberation, and I too use that as kind of this Bible, if you will, that I return to over and over throughout the years. One of my favorite quotes that he mentions, which ties into this kind of zoo rhetoric, is he says, if possessing a higher degree of intelligence does not entitle one human to use another for his or her own ends, how can it entitle humans to exploit non-humans? And so I always say, well, the second they start putting humans in zoos, then I suppose we can revisit the animal conversation. But I think that there's always a push to, about, in particular with zoos, they talk about the education. My children still go to a school that takes a yearly field trip to the zoo. They stay home on those days. It's this weird choice of my being some outsider and outcast with my children when they go to the San Diego Zoo for the day. And I've petitioned to, kind of stop this practice. It's as though we're all celebrating a religious holiday at school, which we've started to separate. And so I hope that it becomes more like that with education. And so, to that end, even though I could ask you questions for the next 5 days straight without tiring, I will relinquish and kind of give up the rest of my time that I've got you for, Ingrid, today, going over the rapid fire questions. And I told you before we started, one of the things I really like to do to kind of thank my audience and really engage and continue this very transparent dialogue with who I'm talking to and how I'm conveying information is ask them for questions. So when we reached out to everybody who was on our list and told them that you were coming on, we had over 150 different inquiries for you. So you are nothing if not famous. But we've kind of boiled them all down to 20. And so I'm just going to kind of peter these off as the order that they come in. So we had a lot of inquiry as to what your motivation or this like inspirational impetus for launching PETA was. A lot of people know your history and they know that you were in DC, developing, organizing and cleaning up this humane society in DC that you'd been asked to come out and do, and you launched PETA after that. But did you have an inspirational moment that you thought, I'm starting this foundation?
I had a whole bunch of inspirational moments, but the main impetus I can tell you quickly, because that's a lot of questions in a short amount of time we've got to cover, is that I loved animals from the moment I can think back, and probably before that. And yet I ate them, I wore them, I wore fur, I went fishing. I did all those things. I would just never imagine kicking a dog or tying a firecracker to a cat's tail or starving a horse or any of those basic obvious things, but I didn't connect the dots. And I had experiences. I started inspecting laboratories for the Maryland government. I found a fox and a squirrel caught in steel traps behind a convenience store. One thing after another, and slowly I learned that animals suffer, all of them, in so many different ways because of my thoughtlessness or because I didn't know. And I thought, I want to start a small group. It was, 5 of us back then who decided to do it, a small group just to make sure we can reach as many people as we possibly can. There wasn't an internet then. And let them know that if you care about animals, it's not just dogs, cats, and horses and so on. It's the whole gamut, and they're suffering terribly. You don't realize it. And here are the options of how you can stop contributing to it. So that's why PETA was formed.
Okay. And to that same end, we had people wondering what your original goal for the organization was. A lot of people wondered if you knew, if you had this master scheme as to what a magnificent it was going to become in the generations or the decades to come.
Oh, no, I didn't have any idea of where it was going, except I knew I wanted to do something. And that's true today. I want to do everything I possibly can. And I know that every one of our members and supporters, anybody who cares about animals, is driven in the same way, is let's think of all the things we can do to make this work, because it's not good enough to just personally stop eating them and wearing them and so on. It's really, we've got to grow this movement. So I just lost a week ago Friday, Reagan Russell, a wonderful activist in Toronto, was knocked down and killed by a pig transport truck. And so this week I've been thinking a lot about what to do, because there's one activist missing when we need to be adding activists, not subtracting them. So I want to do some things that she would be doing. And I've asked everybody I know and all the staff at PETA to please buy 2 packs of vegan sausages or vegan ham or vegan anything, bacon, and find somebody who still eats animals, still eats pigs. She was run over by a pig truck, and give it to them, because you never know. Find them and feed them. Somebody who's not going to try it, who hasn't tried it, try to bring them along. We have to keep very active, posting things up on social, on bulletin boards, talking to other people, feeding other people, so that they come into the movement too.
Absolutely. It's a great homage to pay to her as well. The next question is, what is your definition of animals? We had a lot of people writing in about insects and where you and PETA define animals.
I don't think it matters to agonize about how far this is going to go. I do believe that we know that just because an insect is small doesn't mean they don't feel pain. I mean, they certainly do, and there have been innumerable hideous studies. There's a German scientist, actually, who studies empathy in ants. And the way he does it is he cuts off an ant's leg, and he lets that ant call out to others, and he sees other ants come and help that ant who's lost his leg to the snips. And so I think we know that even insects, just as tiny as they are, that they're capable of pain too. The big thing in my mind is we are all animals. We need to start, that nobody needs to worry for a second if it's true. A chicken, a dog, a cow, a rabbit, a monkey, that they feel pain and that they shouldn't suffer needlessly. So just make as many inroads as you can. Don't worry where it will lead. Who cares?
Yeah. The next question is towards the term ethical. So PETA stands for the people for the ethical treatment of animals. And people were wondering if the PETA has a very specific definition of ethical as it pertains to its cause.
It's just a dictionary definition. I mean, for us, it means what's in the animal's best interest, not what's popular or what people will like or what people can easily understand, but what, upon examination, is the thing that will be the best thing for that animal in that circumstance.
Yeah. Our following question was the PETA seal. We had a lot of people who, looking at consumerism, they wanted to know if there was kind of this blanket security that they were, when something is certified PETA, what does that mean?
Well, there are PETA-approved various things. There's PETA-approved clothing, and that means that nothing in it came from an animal, nothing stolen, nothing for which an animal had to be slaughtered. There are cruelty-free lists, and some of those mean PETA-approved for no animal ingredients, like slaughterhouse products like lanolin and hydrolyzed animal protein and collagen and so on that comes from animal sources. And some are PETA approved as not tested on animals, and some things are PETA approved vegan. And for all those logos, in order to use them, you have to sign a corporate executive. Someone at the top has to certify in a signed statement that that is the fact of what they are doing and what they're not doing. That gets you PETA approved. And they know that if they're found to do something that they say that they're not doing, or vice versa, that we have a consumer lawsuit against them, quick as a snap, because so many people look at us and go by them, rely on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, we have a lot of people asking if there is an app that PETA uses for scanning barcodes for products that are not PETA, or that are not yet labeled as PETA certified, but are.
Yeah, there are lists and there are things like that. If you go to PETA.org, you can search for various things like that. I am not a technical person, but I know they exist. And there's also a feature where we have mentors too. So, for example, if you're a new vegan and you sign up and you're really confused in the grocery store, you can call your mentor, text your mentor, and you'll get an instant answer about various things.
Yeah, that's part of your educational platform. And I have to say really quickly as a side note, just my own personal opinion, but PETA.org has a kids tab and a page that really does kind of go through activities, games, different ways children can get involved, and ways to speak to your children about animals and things like that for parents alike. It does an incredible job with such a vast parenting is no joke. And introducing children into this cause and giving them the information and the knowledge, and also introducing it into an educational platform. It's a beautiful way that you guys have it done on there. I encourage everyone to do it. We had a lot of people write in about fashion labels because PETA's had this great effort, and a lot of people who aren't involved in the fashion scene may not know, but you guys have really persisted over decades to sit down with major fashion labels and sit down and give them the information and alternative products and things like that. And we had people ask if you had a specific one that had really converted, that was your favorite, so like a major fashion house, say for instance, I don't know, Zara, that had like really gone the distance compared to where they were at prior to meeting with you.
Yeah, there are many. And of course, luckily it's growing. That list is expanding every moment. We've got an investigation that was conducted in Peru recently showing the awful cruelty to alpacas because alpaca wool has become quite popular. And we have a campaign against anthropology. They will not meet with us. And they own, of course, Urban Outfitters and Free People and so on. So, yes, we need everybody's help with that. But my personal favorite, one of them, because there are many, is Zara. Because when we did our investigation into the use of rabbits in China for Angora, where they're tied down and you see them screaming, it's absolutely unbearable. And they just live pluck out their hair. They pull their hair right out of their bodies. It's just absolutely awful. Anyway, we took that footage to Zara and to all the people who sold Angora. And Zara had its corporate meetings, took all the, made the decision that they would definitely not sell any Angora anymore. And we pointed out to them that they had about $1 million worth of Angora still on their shelves, on their racks. And so they went away and met again, and they came back and they said, all right, fine, you can have it. So they gave us almost $1 million worth of Angora. And of course, we packaged it up. We sent it to refugees, Syria, Afghanistan in the winter for the children. And so those are people who don't have a choice, who can't wear anything else, who aren't going to go out and buy anything. And that's what they did. So I thought Zara did a very ethical, to use that word, thing. It was a business loss for them. And they just decided, yes, but it's not ethical to carry it. It's not ethical to have it on the shelves. It's over.
That's amazing. I had no idea of that story, that correlation. It's amazing that I plucked it out of the air. Cosmos were aligned. That's an awesome story, and good on Zara. We need more of them. So can you predict, we had people writing in about maybe you forecasting a change in the wind. When you took over the Vogue offices, it was this moment in time for a lot of people that's still being very reflected on. And can you predict a change in the wind? Well, we had a lot of people ask about what your current stance with Vogue USA, obviously different from Vogue Europe and France and things like that. But Vogue USA, what is PETA's current relationship with Vogue? Has it changed since what people think it was, which was that of when you took over or occupied the offices?
Well, everything is changing. And I think one of the things that's changed about Vogue, and by the way, it was a hoot to, aside from being useful, it was great fun to take over their offices. I was able to answer the phone at Vogue, and everybody who called, I was able to say, I'm sorry, we're closed today due to cruelty to animals, and hang up on them. And Anna Wintour barricaded herself in her office and wouldn't come out. But I was very delighted to see the other day that she was wearing a Stella McCartney coat, and it's faux fur, and it's quite obviously faux fur. And so finally, she's been very cold-hearted, very unreceptive, and that she's wearing that. But what has happened is through our meetings and our demonstrations and everything else, Prada, Gucci, Galliano, Donatella Versace, none of those places that used to advertise fur in Vogue sells it anymore. So, Vogue is changing because the designers have changed under public pressure.
But that's by proxy. That's not really Vogue changing, right? That's more the designers catching on and them just representing, which maybe was always meant to happen.
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly right. It's the power of the purse. They know what people are buying, and maybe they're not making an ethical decision. At the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter. You'd rather it was an ethical decision, but at the end of the day, if fewer animals to no animals suffer, then fabulous. Make it for business reasons, because if you tell corporations, I'm not buying that, it's cruel to animals, I'm buying this because it's humane, truly humane, not humane washing, then all the businesses change because they just want what's in your pocket at the end of the day.
Yeah, the power of the consumer dollar. Even on the most minuscule scale, I really think it's the way we push. I'm all about, changing law and legal, but I think the fastest route to change is the power of the consumer dollar.
The power of the purse. Yep.
Yeah. I'm wondering, well, and I have to say, as a side note, I'm possibly a Stella McCartney junkie. And so I have one of her original purses. It's a long relationship, mainly on my part. I'm sure Stella will one day realize how obsessed I am with her if I ever speak with her. However, I think that she's done a really good job as a designer. Back before people were doing even alternative leathers like pineapple and apple, she did a really good job at talking about how she looked at both products, and in the end couldn't differentiate, and almost felt like, the leather alternative was better for her brand anyway. Aside from the fact that her mother was a very famous vegetarian and things like that, she talks about the due diligence of actually looking at the product and how leather is just, it's a stigma in people's heads. It's not as luxurious and great as people think it is, which I adore. I want to turn now to Joaquin Phoenix. I know that it's kind of hyped up, but we had a lot of people write in that weren't so much based on, everyone knows, or probably could Google it very quickly by now and find out that his acceptance speech spoke about animal cruelty and kind of enumerated on specific cows and things like that. But we had a lot of people write in and ask if Joaquin Phoenix is a spokesperson for PETA, or if he is publicly affiliated, or if you guys are just of the same feather.
Well, we adore him. He was our man of the and of course he's been to every gala that we've had. He's been our humanitarian of the year too. We do work closely with him. He was kind enough to let us know what he was thinking of when he was looking at the Oscars and all the other award shows. And they did give him a hard time, the first, and they said, oh, no, we couldn't be fully vegan. We have to have at least fish. And we thought that was very ironic, since it was a fish that made the whole family, all the children, vegan in the first place when they saw a fish flapping on the deck of a ship. So anyway, yes, we work with him. He's just done a new ad. We haven't yet unveiled it for us. He has helped us. He's spoken out against SeaWorld. Of course, he's very active with Pig Save. He goes down to the demonstrations in Los Angeles. He's ridden along on a pig truck. He has always said he wants vegan clothing, and he helped us with our wool campaign, standing in a field with these beautiful sheep, saying, nobody, no matter how fancily you wish to dress, needs to buy anything that contains wool. So we're very, very fond of him. We're very proud to be associated with him. And we hope he continues to win everything that possibly can be for the rest of his life.
Yeah, it's a talented family that he came from. I'll tell you what, I find them to be some of the most amazing thespian-based families. All of his siblings as well. We had a lot of people write in regarding animal tests and trying to find avenues or action items to avoid them. So namely, a lot of people who wrote in talked about swim tests, electric shock plate tests, maternal deprivation tests, and the like that are still happening. And they wanted to know if there was, we talked about, some of the legislation at hand and things like that. They would, a curiosity if you could kind of enumerate on an idea of when they would end and the best course of action to not support companies that do these tests, to find out more, like what an action item that they could attach to fighting those horrific tests.
Well, the most important thing, of course, is activism, is using everything that you have, all the freedoms we have in this country, your voice, your hands, your everything, educating others, trying to get others to go along with you in not buying from bad companies, buying from good companies, always looking at the labels, looking for cruelty-free everything. It really is important. It's not a question of when things will change based on some magical formula. It's based on how many people you can conjure up who will join us so that we can push. And the faster things will change, it depends on how much activism there is. So always look, and if there's an animal involved in the equation and you can't answer the question, yes, that was that animal did it voluntarily, then just don't patronize that company.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. One of our final questions, we had a ton with this, and I'm going to group them all together, and my audience will have to forgive me. There was just so many different areas that people were kind of coming at this, but regarding COVID-19 pandemic, and we had a lot of people kind of write into this inherent annexation with humane and ethical treatment of animals, and the dialogue that seems to be forced with an actual global pandemic that hasn't happened in 100 years. and they were wondering if PETA had a sentiment towards that, if there was a ongoing dialogue in which these aspects were being, explored and spoken about on your platform.
Well, we've been protesting outside slaughterhouses all over the country. We've done an investigation into live markets in Indonesia and Vietnam and Thailand and in China. The one in Wuhan is closed, but there are others that are open. And we've been able to show absolutely phenomenal cruelty. Live animals so stressed, so obviously in trouble disease-wise with next to others, monkeys next to cats, next to parrots, next to bats, next to civet cats, all in these markets. But we've also been in New York. There are about 80 live markets in New York for everything from chickens to turtles. And they wash these markets down, and they wash the bacteria and the viruses from these animals who are stressed out, who have compromised immune systems, into the street. So we've been protesting them. We've got a bill pending in California to ban certain live markets. We've been outside supermarkets giving out tofu with our dancing tofu mascot, saying tofu never caused an epidemic. And we've run full-page ads in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, the gamut, saying it's time to move away from meat, and showing a picture of an actual animal on the slaughterhouse floor about to be bolted in the head or lying dying on the factory farm floor. We've made our mentors available to people, our food available to people. We've been giving out everything, including toilet paper that says wipe cruelty from your diet when there was a shortage of that. So we've been getting op-eds published, letters. We have asked cities to go vegan. We've been pushing in every way we possibly can. And I'm deeply grateful to every single person who has decided that they will help somebody go vegan too, because these pandemics come from confining animals, wild animals, domestic animals. And in fact, just this week, we have heard that in China, they've identified a new potential pandemic on a pig farm. Previous pandemics have come from pig farms in America. Back the so-called Spanish flu is thought to have come from a farm in America. It was misnamed the Spanish flu. And other pandemic potential, like Ebola and so on, have come from confining animals. It has to stop. We have to leave animals alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And our final point of question was, we had a lot of people asking about the PETA podcast hosted by Emil Guillermo. And people were wondering how the subjects for that are curated, and how the guest selection, how all of that, the scheduling was done, and how that's designed.
Well, we're very grateful to Emil, who is a former National Public Radio broadcaster, for hosting the show. And I think people just give suggestions and he picks them. He decides what he's going to do. They're usually highly topical. For example, there will be a COVID one, or there'll be a SeaWorld one if SeaWorld stock prices are announced, or whatever is happening. Emil will decide who at PETA to put on the show. So please go to PETA.org and look at the podcast, and I hope you enjoy it.
Absolutely. I loved it. I listened to a few and I thought it was fantastic. His expertise is renowned. You can hear it through and through. Well, Ingrid, we are all out of time. I promised I would only keep you for an hour. I'm staying true to my word in hopes of staying in your good graces and talking to you again at some point in the future. I want to thank you so much for taking the time for myself, my audience today, and giving us your expertise, your honest rhetoric, your transparent dialogue. And namely, it's such an honor, to speak with someone whose legacy is intertwined with the bettering of the planet and all of its inhabitants. I can't imagine how wonderful it must feel to be making the kind of difference you have been and continue to be. But I am so very proud to have spoken to you today.
Thank you so much for doing it, and my best to everybody who does anything for animals at any time. Please do more of it.
Absolutely. For everyone who's listening, thank you so much for giving us your time. We have been speaking with Ingrid Newkirk. She's the founder of PETA, That is PETA.org. Her book, Animalkind, Remarkable Discoveries About Animals and Revolutionary New Ways to Show Them Compassion. You can check it out on PETA's website, as well as all of independent bookstores and online. And until we speak again next time, remember to stay safe, eat clean and well and responsibly when you do, and always bet on yourself. Sluncha.